Hey guys, welcome in the 14. I'm Nick Cole, and we're breaking down every SEC football game in Week 7 from a betting perspective. Today, we're talking about the Kentucky Wildcats visiting the Georgia Bulldogs in one of the most anticipated SEC East games of the week. This game is going to be played at 3:30 Eastern and will be at Sanford Stadium in Athens, Georgia, and the game will be televised on CBS. From a betting perspective, this game opened with Georgia as a 22-point favorite. And depending on where you look, you may be able to find a little bit different number in different places. But right now we're seeing 22.5 for Georgia as of Thursday. And the over-under opened at 44.5, and it's held steady there as the week's gone along. Let's bring in our betting analyst, Christopher Smith. Christopher, what are you thinking about this game? I don't know. We had this one necessarily circled on our calendars before the season started to be one of the most important games in the league, right?
Yeah, I mean, you look at the numbers in front of these two teams from a rankings perspective, and you have number 11 and number 1, and they're both undefeated. They're the only two SEC teams undefeated. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be close, as you can see by the spread that you just talked about. So we'll get into the betting analysis shortly, but why don't you take us through the injuries, weather, and Nick's news and notes?
Sure. So let's start with the weather. We should have a pretty nice little fall afternoon in Athens on Saturday. We've got a high of 74, but with that mid-afternoon kickoff bleeding into the evening, we'll probably see temperatures in the low 70s, maybe upper 60s by the time this one's over. The thing to watch for, though, from a weather perspective is the wind projected for this afternoon game. It shows anywhere between 10 to 20 miles an hour for the day. And in the afternoon, more specifically, we're looking more like 11 to 15 miles an hour. So that's, typically, Christopher, you say anything over 10 miles an hour is something to factor in when you're talking about betting a total on a game. And so this falls into that category of potentially being something that impacts it. Obviously, we need to know if it's going to be a consistent wind or gusting winds, things like that. So this will be stuff you're going to have to watch right up until kickoff to really get a good feel for what the weather is going to do on that. From an injury standpoint, I'll start with Kentucky because it's easy, and then we'll move to Georgia because it's quite lengthy. Kentucky, we're looking at their second wide receiver, Josh Ali, is doubtful for this game. They were missing him last week as well. Didn't seem to hurt him too much in that win against LSU. Defensive tackle Octavius Oxendine is out for the season, and so that's just another piece they're missing there. For Georgia, it's pretty significant. I'm going to have to check my notes here to make sure I don't miss on somebody. But let's start at the name everybody knows. JT Daniels may or may not play in this game. He's missed the last couple of games with a lat issue, and Stetson Bennett has been starting at quarterback for the Dogs in the meantime, and he's done just fine. Obviously, they're the number one team in the country in spite of not having the guy who was their projected starting quarterback for a good portion of the season. And they may have to go without him again this week. It's just sort of a touch and go thing. He's trying to practice. He's working his way through soreness, and I don't even want to try to project whether he plays or he doesn't. And then if he does play, if he's on some sort of a pitch count or if they do some sort of a quarterback rotation, it's really going to be hard to project. But let's look at the rest of these names. I'll run through them real fast. We've got defensive back Tyke Smith, tight end Darnell Washington, wide receiver Marcus Rosemary Jack Saint, offensive lineman Jamari Sawyer, and those are the guys that are probable. And I'm going to go to questionable next. Wide receiver Jermaine Burton. We got JT Daniels in that category at quarterback. Running back Kenny McIntosh. Strong safety Christopher Smith. Wide receiver Arian Smith. In the out category, I count we got about 10 more guys here. Amir Speed, Dominic Blaylock at wide receiver, Jalen Kimber, Tresman Marshall, Julian Rochester, George Pickens, Tate Retledge, Ryan Davis, and Eric Gilbert. Christopher, I know that we're talking about the top team in the country, but at some point that list becomes significant. And actually, I really think it's pretty impressive that they're undefeated and just playing right through that. It really speaks to the depth of the recruiting that Kirby Smart's done there. And then let's just look at the news and notes real fast. Let's set the stage for what this game means. This game may determine the outcome of this game may determine the SEC East champion. Next thing we look at is whether or not this is actually Mark Stoops' biggest game at Kentucky. I mean, this has been a long time coming for the Wildcats fans who wondered, should we get rid of Stoops? Have we gone as far as we can go with Stoops? Well, this is what you've been waiting for. You're 6-0. You're coming off wins against Florida and LSU and Lexington, breaking a 35-year losing streak at home against Florida, beating LSU. I mean, you're in a spot that you dream of. You're knocking on the doorstep of the top 10. You're playing the number one team in the country, but you're going on the road and you're playing a team that Stoops has never beaten. Georgia's won the last 10 games against Kentucky, and the last game that the Wildcats have won in Athens was in 2009. So this is a big ask, but it's also could be a program-defining win for them. And Chris, I'm going to turn over to you from a betting perspective. Obviously, we see this line is at 22, 23 points. And when you're talking about two teams that are highly ranked and 6-0, it's a little bit odd to see such a big spread, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's odd if you only look at, the 0 next to Kentucky's name, but I don't think it's odd if you break down these two teams. Now, Georgia's rushing offense, they're only 83rd in EPA per snap. So everybody knows that they're going to run the ball because, especially without JT Daniels and George Pickens and a ton of other names at receiver, they've been basically leaning on their defense and running the ball a lot, which, surprise, surprise, every year we talk about how that may change with Kirby Smart, and every year we kind of get the same thing. But it's worked very well this year, but they're not super explosive running the ball. They stick to it. They get a lot of short fields, and they chew you up if your offense flames out. So, when they do throw the ball, even without their skill players, they've actually been very explosive through the passing game, probably because just with their style and the way the game scripts have gone, teams have just had to play the run against them. So the thing is that if you look at who Georgia has played so far, based on SP Plus, the top offense that they've faced is Clemson, and SP Plus has their offense, I believe, at 31st. And the only reason that Clemson is even 31st is because of what we call priors. And there's still some priors in the data to this point in the season. You need priors when you're projecting things to make it accurate. But you take out those priors and you only go by the data just the season. And it's questionable whether Georgia has even faced a top 40 offense. Kentucky is sort of right on the borderline of that. So, we'll see if this is the game that Georgia has to get away from the run the ball and play defense plan. But at some point, they're going to face an offense that forces them to have to throw the ball. Look at the other side of the ball. Kentucky's 19th in EPA per rush allowed on defense. So they're good against the run. They don't give up explosive plays because on the back end of the defense, they play way back. And they're 115th defending passing success rate. So the way to beat Kentucky's defense is actually to throw underneath a lot. So your slot receivers, your tight ends across the middle, and soft sort of underneath spots. So Georgia may be able to do that if they cannot run the ball in this game. The big question to me is on the other side of the ball. You have Wan'Dale Robinson at receiver for Kentucky, who now that Keyshawn Butte is out, probably after Treylon Burks at Arkansas, he's probably one of the next one or two best receivers in the SEC that's healthy. And the question has always been on this Georgia defense has been their secondary. It's just that teams haven't had enough time to really work downfield very often against them. But Robinson is the type of player who could test that secondary if Kentucky has enough time. Now, you mentioned the wind. Will Levis has never had an issue physically. He's maybe one of the strongest arms in the SEC, very stout physically as well. So I think he'd probably be able to cut through the wind, but it's just a matter of protection against the Georgia pass rush. Now, the thing that Kentucky, one of the matchups in this game that I think benefits Kentucky is running back Chris Rodriguez. He leads the SEC in yards after contact by a good margin. And against Georgia, when he's clearly going to get hit in the backfield or at the line of scrimmage very often, if he can turn a lot of those plays into 3-yard gain, 4-yard gain, even though he's getting hit early, and he's the best in the SEC at doing that, then maybe that gives Kentucky a chance, especially if the game script goes where, Georgia doesn't get an early lead and doesn't get to play exactly how they want to play the whole game. And Kentucky isn't forced to throw the ball early and often. So we'll see how the game goes. But I think that's what I'm really looking at from a betting standpoint. Nick, who are you taking on this game and why?
So here's what I'm thinking. I think that Georgia is the sort of their floor at this point to me is about 35 points scored offensively. They've been pretty consistently pushing there. I think back to this 37-0 win against Arkansas where they cruised to a home win there. So I like the over 44.5 if I can get my 14 points out of that Kentucky offense. Can I get 2 touchdown drives out of them? If I do, not only can we cover this 44.5, I think we can also get Kentucky plus 22.5 as well. So give me the Wildcats and the points, give me the over. But I do think if this for the purposes of picking for this week, I think if you're putting your real money on it, this is a tough game to project based on the game script. Like you said, Kentucky gets behind early. All bets are off on whether they can even come close to covering that. But if they get through that first quarter, through that first half, with a 1 or 2 possession game, I like the Wildcats being able to cover this 22.5. How you feel it?
Yeah, I'm definitely going to keep a close eye on the Georgia quarterback situation. I think that if Daniels plays, there's no way I would touch this game. But if you told me today that Stetson Bennett is starting at quarterback for Georgia, I would like under 44.5 at that point. I just think the reason that Georgia is scoring 35 plus is because of their defense. And also I think Kentucky actually matches up really, really well against Georgia's offense, assuming that Stetson Bennett is the quarterback. I think Kentucky is good against the run and they don't give up big plays in the passing game. Those are the 2 things that the Georgia offense actually does. So considering Kentucky runs the ball at a super high percentage, if they can start out kind of controlling the game script, then I can see the game being very low scoring. I do like Kentucky plus 22.5 just because of a lot of the things I just talked about. But again, it's not a game that I'm going to bet on. And especially if Daniels plays, then I think there's a 50-50 shot of Georgia being good enough and more dynamic on offense enough to kind of get the game out of control early and turning it into just a horrible game script where Kentucky's got to throw the ball all the time and it could get ugly. But assuming that either Daniels doesn't play or Georgia's offense just isn't dynamic in the passing game because Kentucky's good at preventing big plays, I'll go with Kentucky plus 22.5 and under 44.5. For Nicole, I'm Christopher Smith for the 14, and we'll talk to you next week.